AT 53 weekend students. This is Mr. Ward, and I'm going to show you pretty much the same lesson that I did with my Tuesday night class last week on Lesson Planning 101 at UCA. I'm going to make videos, and I'm going to make them in 15-minute segments so that maybe you can sift through and find the things you need again if you want to hear something again. I'm also going to try to not stop. So if I say something goofy or get a word mixed up, I may not even notice it. And I'm just going to keep rolling so that we can get it all done. So I just want you to know that when talking about lesson planning and looking at the UCA lesson plan documents, I've taught this to undergraduates and graduates, and I try to approach it in lots of ways. It's difficult when you have a room full of people that all maybe want to teach different subjects to use an example lesson that only caters to one of those subjects and for other people to really feel like it's beneficial to them. And so I used to just use language arts because that was my area and I felt like I could present it the best and it would make the most sense, but it only made the most sense to me and to the language arts people in the room. Then I tried science once, which really didn't work for lots of people. That's my other area of certification. So I began looking for a subject that everyone pretty much understands enough that they could imagine themselves possibly teaching it to someone else. And I settled on driver's education. So for this presentation, I'm going to ask you to imagine that I tell you and someone else from the class that tomorrow 25 ninth graders are coming to wherever you are, and they're going to be ready for a driver's education lesson that you're going to teach for them. And I just do this as a way to get some of the thinking process started. So just bear with me here. And imagine I tell you tomorrow you're going to teach driver's education to a group of ninth graders. And we'll just say there's 25 of them. We'll even say that it's half boys and half girls. So that's really all you know. Ninth graders, 25, half boys and half girls. They're coming in 24 hours. They'll be wherever you are. And you have another teacher with you from our class who will help you out. And the two of you are going to teach driver's ed to these ninth graders. So I ask everyone in the class, knowing that this is going to happen, what are some questions that you might need to ask yourself and answer before tomorrow's lesson? Because they're coming. Whether you feel prepared or not, those 25 ninth graders are going to show up and they'll be ready to learn something about driving. So what do you need to figure out before they get there? So I asked the class to all answer this question individually, and then I had them share their answer with a partner, and then I asked them as a whole group to share some of the best questions that they think they'd have to answer. And this is pretty much a list of the basic questions that came up that night. Most importantly, what are we teaching? What is the subject of our lesson? Why is whatever we're teaching important? Because we have to kind of convince these students that it's important. How will we teach what we're going to teach? What will be our method of instruction? What do we know about these students beyond their age and the number and gender? Not a lot. And sometimes you don't know a whole lot about your students, especially when you're an intern and you're kind of bouncing around and teaching lessons. You're not maybe there all the time. But when you are there consistently, of course, you'll know lots more about them. But we're just going to imagine that we don't know much. Knowing that we don't know much about them, so what materials are we going to use to make this lesson really effective? And what materials are appropriate for ninth graders? And what materials are appropriate for driver's education lessons? We talked about all of these issues and why we might choose certain materials over others. How will we group these students? And what grouping arrangement would be most effective? Meaning, are we going to keep them all kind of whole group focused the entire time? Or are we going to have a part of the lesson that uses pairs and another part of the lesson that uses small groups? And will we have something during the lesson that they'll do individually? And why are we making all of these choices about grouping? How will we assess what they already know? And why would we check to see what they already know? How many of them already have a permit? How many of them have never driven a car? How many of them have never cracked open their driver's manual at all? Other than riding around in a car, that's all they know about teaching. How will we get them hooked into our lesson and make them interested in wanting to listen to us, especially during the first 10 minutes of the lesson? What will we say or do or present or facilitate to get the lesson started and introduce the topic that we're going to teach them? And why would we choose this particular method? There's more. How will we present the content? Again, this is kind of the same question we asked before, but what method will work best for these students? How will the students show us what they have learned at the end of the lesson and maybe along the way? How will we review what we've taught to them, maybe towards the end of the lesson or as we go along? How will we check how much they know as we go so that will inform our lesson as we are teaching it? What will we do to close down this lesson as we get near the end of it? Come on, Google. There we go. What will we ask students to do outside of class that will help reinforce what they've learned during the lesson? What will we ask to check their understanding? How will we reflect on the success of our own lesson? How will we know how much they've learned? What could we do to set up a scenario where we would know how much of an impact our lesson had on their understanding? And then how will we differentiate for these students? Knowing that we have different kinds of learners in the room, how will we differentiate for their different learning styles or special needs, any accommodations we have to make? How can we modify to reach all of our learners? So I had them think about these questions, and then I said, all right, so tonight we're going to learn the lesson plan format, plan and analysis, and we're going to use a driver's education lesson, and it will really help if we actually answered some of these questions together. So we began brainstorming for what will we actually teach during the lesson if this was real. One of the things I brought along with me to help us is the actual set of driver's education course goals from the ADE that junior highs and high schools use. Basically, these are the curriculum frameworks for teaching driver's ed. And so we started to look through here to find something that we thought might be appropriate for us to teach to these students. And this document, just so you understand how these work, usually a curriculum framework document, near the beginning will be a set of course goals. So these are the 8 big goals of a driver's ed course. And then the following pages will break down each of these specific course goals into the more detailed. So we started to look at this one, and we thought maybe this one would be a good one. We scrolled down and we found, well, here's goal 1. There's the standard that we just saw, and here are all the specifics that have to be taught underneath this first goal. And the first one we thought would be great: demonstrate through successful completion of written assignments and assessments knowledge of traffic signs, signals, and markings. And we didn't want to try to teach signs, signals, and markings, regulatory warning and guide in one lesson. So we decided that we would keep it relatively simple, and we will focus on some traffic signs, knowledge of traffic signs. So we took this curriculum framework, and I created a Google document for us, and we put that document at the top. We put that framework at the top of the document. And then next we took this larger framework and we got more specific. This is the actual objective of our lesson, and this is what we would actually share with the students. We might write this on the board, or we might put this on one of the first slides of a presentation, and we'd make sure that we clearly told the students, hey, today, here's what you should learn. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify and explain 10 common traffic signs that you see on the road. And then here was our rough plan. So if we were going to really do this, the Tuesday night class decided here's what we would do. First of all, when these kids come in the room, we would get them settled in, and we do some sort of pre-assessment on the 10 signs that we know we're teaching. And this would be a written assessment. It would be individual. We could use a Google form. We decided that all of these kids would have a device with them that they could use, and we would have the capabilities to let them all get on their devices at once. And we'd show them the 10 signs, and we'd ask them to identify and explain, maybe just identify the signs. Do you even know what these mean? So that would happen first. Then we would play some sort of engaging get-to-know-you road sign game in teams, just to break the ice, get them up, get them moving, and do something interesting. We didn't plan the details. We just know the basics. After the introduction activity, we would teach the first 5 road signs. And for the first 5, we decided we would use a projector and a screen, like a smart board. We would show the road sign, and we would ask students to individually, in writing, predict the meaning. So do you know what this is? Do you know what it means? and we would have them write down answers. And then we would ask some students to say, all right, well, what did you answer? And the reason we decided to have them write it down individually and not just think about it is we were looking for a show of engagement, something that's written on paper that they could put their name on. We could take it up and we could say, hey, we had these kids engaged throughout the lesson, and here's some evidence of the engagement that went on. Plus, sometimes kids don't actually think the way you want them to think. They just can pose and look at you and pretend that they're thinking about what you're talking about. So if you ask them to write, it actually usually prompts them to engage. Literally, it works. So we'd have them share, and then maybe we would show a couple of short YouTube videos that might illustrate a couple of the signs in action, especially if some of them are a little bit more complicated. And then we would have what's called a formative assessment, a quick assessment in the middle of the lesson just to see how much everyone has learned so far. So we decided we would use maybe a poll everywhere application through their phones, have everybody text in answers, and we would assess the first 5 and just reinforce those. Then for the second 5, we would switch up our method, and this time we would use a role play activity that we will have scripted and planned out. We decided that we would have some roads taped onto the floor with masking tape. And so we would put some placards on students, maybe like a little string around their neck with some cardboard, and it would say something like, I'm an 88 Chevy truck. We might even have a picture of the trucks and cars. We figured they might like that. And then as we teach the next 5, we'll have them role play through scenarios. And we'll make some little road signs that we can hold up, like, you're encountering a yield sign on the road. What would you do in this situation? And we would expect that the second 5 would be a little bit the more difficult of the 10 that would have more explanation required. Next after that, we would have them review all 10 signs. We're on number 6 through some sort of small group puzzle activity. And this would be like maybe an envelope. It would have the 10 road signs in it in cutout form. They would dump those out. There would also be 10 explanations. They'd have to match them up. We might even make it a contest to see who could get done most accurately and in the least amount of time, perhaps. And we talked about prizes or something like that. Next, they would do something individual, which would be maybe a case scenario involving a road sign. This would be written. We'd have a short discussion. And then finally, we would assess them again on all 10 signs. We would also ask them to explain the signs. And these 2 extra questions are important, and I'll refer to them later. We'd ask them to identify the most helpful part of the lesson, and we'd ask them to identify the least helpful part of the lesson, meaning which part of this lesson most helped you to learn the 10 road signs, which part of the lesson least helped you to learn the 10 road signs. Again, later on, you'll understand why we would ask that question. Then we would have an extension activity, which is just a fancy word for homework, which would be to take 3 pictures, take pictures of road signs, 3 of them, that were discussed today. So the signs you saw in class, go out and find some of those in the world. Take a picture and maybe look around at, what's the road look like around that sign? Why is there a yield sign there? Or why is there some sort of cautionary sign there? And then they will submit their pictures and explanations about the context. So that's the basic lesson that we would teach. Seems like a lot. And we thought, this lesson might be longer than 50 minutes, or it might be just right. So, there might be one of these things we'd have to cut. We would not cut our assessment because we need that. We might be able to cut the individual case scenario if we needed to. The reason that we're doing a pre-assessment and a post-assessment is this is an observed lesson. Someone is coming to watch me teach, and I know because I've looked at the reflection document that one of the questions I'm going to have to ask at the end of this lesson is, how much did the students learn? And if I don't have any data to support that, it will be very difficult for me to give an answer that is accurate at all. So for an observed lesson, when you know you're being graded, it's very wise to pre-assess quickly and post-assess so that you can say, all right, here, I taught this lesson to 100 people today, if it was, in an internship. And you can put all their data together and say 20% of the people could do this at the beginning, but at the end, 80% of the people could do this. And that definitely shows that you made an impact. And it is important that teachers nowadays prove that they're making an impact. So now I'm going to go back to our lesson plan presentation and just say a couple things, and then I'll stop the first video and move on to the second one, keep them a little short. We've already seen all of this, and Google's being slow. Hang on a minute. I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep clicking. Almost done. Get a drink of water or something. Check your phone, just like you do in class. That's a joke. Oh, and I went too far. Great. This is what I wanted you to see. So here's the disclaimer, is that you might think, wow, these UCA lesson planning documents are crazy long. And my friend who's a teacher, who's been teaching for 20 years, saw my lesson plan from UCA and my analysis and said, are you crazy? That's incredibly long. No one lesson plans like that in the real world. What are they thinking at UCA? Here's my lesson plan booklet. And then they'll whip out a little book that has little squares in it, and they show you that I only write about 4 sentences each day about what I'm teaching. UCA is crazy. No one would fill that out every day. We know that. We fully realize that no regular, everyday lesson planning is going to be done the way that we have you do it. We're training you on how to do the lesson planning for an observation, and not just a UCA MAT program observation. What we have you do is super close, almost exactly the same that you will have to do if you are a public school teacher in Arkansas as part of your test evaluations. You can go online and you can find the Arkansas Department of Education's website. You can find the test materials. You can compare them. They're super close, like almost word for word is how close they are. So what they call the pre-observation, we call the lesson plan and analysis. What they call the post-observation, we call the lesson reflection. And the questions are very, very similar. I'm going to stop here and start a new video.